Well, greetings out there in YouTube land, and welcome to today's new video, which will prove that old adage that vintage tube amp repair is never a dull sport. Check out the prehistoric beast here that was just delivered for repairs. I believe it is a very early K amp. It's quite compact with a surprisingly nice mustache handle, tubes packed separately, and enough power cord so that you could plug it in a neighboring state if their electric rates were a little lower. It's covered with a very unusual and decorated material that it resembles almost wallpaper, but as you can see there is somewhat of a fabric weave to it, so it is more of a cloth than a paper. Looking inside, we see the rat encrusted chassis with two inputs cleverly marked here with stencil. No name that I can see on the chassis or speaker. And speaking of the speaker, which seems a little redundant, it's an 8-inch electrodynamic speaker in which the electromagnet cover dwarfs the speaker basket. Rather unusual. I mean, when you go to all of this trouble, you'd think you'd at least put like a 10 or 12-inch speaker, but then I guess it wouldn't fit very well in this cabinet, would it? The one feature that endears this amp to me, even more than the rustic and wonderful appearance, look at those corner protectors, is this wooden fretwork here that, let's face it, pretty well blocks the speaker output. But my God, look at the musical note decoration. Okay, to me that about doubles the value. We'll have to check with the customer to see if they want the grill cloth replaced, because this is looking just about as threadbare as some of the old shirts I have hanging in my closet. Well, enough speculation. I think it's time to go in the house and fire up the old kerosene-powered computer and see if we can do some research on this and figure out exactly what it is and when it was made, and with fingers crossed, see if we can find a schematic for it. About all we have to base our identification on is a very unusual tube set, a 6C8 preamp tube with a grid cap, volume control right here, and then a 6C5, a 6N6, and an 80 rectifier. Let's go inside and see what we can find. Well, you're not going to believe this, but the very first site that I checked, which is classictubeaudio.com, and I will put the link in the video description, I found the exact amp. Okay, let's scroll down just a little and see what they think it is. Apparently it is a 1939 model 859 amplifier by K, so it was indeed a K amp. Okay, there's one version that the author found. He shows the chassis underneath, which we'll have to take a look in just a second and see how well it agrees with this. And then of course he comments on that small 8-inch speaker with the giant electrodynamic magnet on the rear. Here's more images, more pictures. Let me move the camera over just a little. And finally a similar model that was reported by a fellow in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So it looks like now there's 3 of them. Okay, he also alludes to a schematic. So let me see if I can find that and download it. It's not essential, but on ancient amps like this, when you're facing that, and if it's been worked on at all, you never know if it was done properly. So it's good to have a schematic so you can put it back to original specs. Okay, let me check for the schematic. Well, as luck would have it, after looking through every possible source of old schematics, I can't find anything even close to the K859. So it looks like we're on our own with this one. So let's go back to the workshop and get started. Longtime viewers will probably be familiar with my moaning and groaning about how difficult it is to separate an electrodynamic speaker from a chassis, because there's so many wires connected to the circuit. In this case, the engineers at K came up with a better idea, and that is a 4-prong plug to make that connection. Well, I flipped it over and only 2 of the 4 screws holding the chassis were present, and in keeping with that, only 2 of the 4 feet were present. So the chassis is loose, and we've got to make a mental note to replace these rear feet. Well, the chassis is out, and we can see a nice clean place where it resided and a really hideous place where it didn't. This looks like centuries of coagulated rat urine and droppings, which I eagerly anticipate scraping out. Okay, now the chassis though is out of the cabinet and ready for us to flip over. Also, of course, we're going to have to work on all the grunge here that has attached to the surface. And since those pesky K engineers decided to put a floor on the chassis, we'll have to undo these sheet metal screws so that we can drop that floor off. Okay, the floor is off, and wonder of wonders, I figured this was just like a blotter to capture the drippings from the rats and capacitors. It appears there is a schematic attached here to the floor. When we look inside, we can see that that's a good thing, because just about all of these capacitors are about, 85 years past their expiration date. Okay, so it's going to take a bunch of component replacement and a bunch of Xanax to prevent anxiety over how much wax has melted and come out of this roasted power transformer. Makes you nervous when you see signs of heat like that. Let's hope this jewel is still intact. Okay, let me see if I can free up the elusive schematic here, this rare document, and see if we can get a look at it. Alright, I got it unfolded. One of the 4 quarters is glued securely to the floor of the chassis, so we have to leave it connected, and I simply have unfolded it. Some of it is just destroyed, but good luck has smiled upon us in that the schematic itself is very legible. Now, since this is possibly the only one of these in existence, let me get up real close for any of you at home who may have an amp like this and no access to a schematic. And you can pause the video and maybe make a copy of this. Okay, so we will be referring to this as we dismantle the waxy and wretched circuit and replace the long worn out parts with new ones. Something of interest here, I just noticed, apparently when this schematic was made, they were using a 6N7 tube as the first preamp, then V1 position. Then later they switched to a 6C8. Now, this schematic has been altered to reflect that change, and the tube socket is embossed 6C8. So this was not a conversion made by a viewer, an owner of the amp, but one made by the factory. Okay, so this schematic then will work in both cases because it appears that the internal structure of both tubes is the same. Now, we've already commented on the roasted power transformer, but then we have this battle-scarred transformer here, which you may think is a output transformer, but when you see only 2 leads, this is going to be a filter choke, and it is down here as T1 on the schematic. The output transformer, in typical early amp fashion, is attached to the speaker basket. And these 4 wires that connect the speaker to the chassis are shown here on the diagram. As you can see, 2 of them from the small pins will go to the output transformer primary, which is a 7,000 ohm primary. The field coil is 10,000 ohms, okay, of impedance, and it is connected to the 2 large pins on the plug. And that's fairly typical. and we see that the secondary of the output transformer has 2 ohms of impedance to match the 2 ohm speaker voice coil. Well, good news. A quick check of the windings from the power transformer show that both the high voltage, the 6.3 volt, and the 5 volt windings have good continuity. So apparently this transformer has survived the overheating that it has fed. Okay, first let's address this can containing 3 different filter caps, a 20, a 10, and a 5. Now there's no doubt that this needs to be replaced. There's no way that these filter caps could have survived 80 years, okay? And I know purists might say, oh, let's try and reform them over the next 6 months with the Variac, but I really think it would be prudent to install new filter caps in this circuit. Alright, it's time for a wiring update on the K circuit. There's the new 20 microfarad filter cap, 10 microfarad, 5 microfarad. Also, there's 2 new 25 at 50 volt cathode bypass caps. Okay, now one thing I need to tell you here is that this amp is owned by a fairly well-known harmonica player who intends to use it in some of his performances. Therefore, we have to consider reliability over originality, okay, in this particular case. So I am not going to go in and test and try to preserve each of the ancient waxy caps. We're going to go in and replace them with new ones so that the owner will have a good chance of using this amp for a long, long time. Well, it's a great day here for receiving gifts. Beautifully double boxed and wrapped with the tubes separate is this just spectacularly nice, very old Knight Allied Radio Corporation phonograph amp. Okay, let me remove the grill and we'll take a look inside. The viewer who sent this chooses to remain anonymous, so we'll honor his request and just say that, boy, does he have good taste in phonograph amps. Look at this, the old hammer tone finish, big husky power and output transformers, a great tube set featuring some of our favorite octal preamps, 6SC7, 6SN7, and a 6SL7. 6L6 GA output, 2 nicely matched tubes, and then a 5U4 rectifier. Let's take a look at the schematic. It says it's a 20 watt phono amp. If you're really interested, I guess you could pause the video and study this closer. But for now, let me turn it around and we'll take a look at the rear panel. Looks like we have a recorder output and then all sorts of different speaker impedances, very much like a PA amp. And then over here are the 2 inputs, this for channel 1 and magnetic pickup, probably with a little bit of extra preamp for the low magnetic output from a magnetic cartridge. Up for microphone, and just in gorgeous shape. Now, I remember that Allied Radio and Knight made kits. This is not a kit, apparently, because it says it was union made, and it also says made in the USA. Now, I haven't looked at the wiring of it yet, but I have a feeling then maybe this was actually a complete unit that was sold by Knight. A lot of you out there are going to know more about this than I do, and you can enlighten me in the comments section. But all I can say is I am just thrilled. The condition and quality are certainly first class. So thanks so much to the anonymous donor, and I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't have a video featuring this in the near future. Okay, thank you. Lo and behold, here in the 1952 Allied Radio catalog, we find our Knight 20 watt high fidelity phono amplifier, at the rather stout price of $64.50. Okay, so that sure nails down the date of manufacture and the fact that it was not a kit but was sold as an assembled product. Well, it's about time to install a brand new 3-wire chassis grounding power cord, but before we do, let's replace the 2 waxy coupling caps that will be hidden underneath it. Okay, the 3-wire power cord is installed with the hot wire running through the switch, and the newly installed sort of antique, a little bit dingy looking fuse holder so that it fits in and looks like it belongs there. The return wires wired directly to the primary of the power transformer, and the green chassis grounding wire is securely soldered to a wire which is also soldered to the chassis. In addition, the 2 coupling capacitors have been replaced. That's a 0.1 and that's a 0.047. Also, as you may have noticed, that old can capacitor has been removed. I drilled out the rivet. That is not original. That was put in, I don't know, in the last 10 or 20 years, so there's no need having it clutter the circuit. Alright, with all the capacitors replaced and all the necessary wiring redone, let's flip it over, clean up this tube set and install it, and then plug this into the current limiter and see what happens. I know you'll be relieved that I cleaned that rat urine souffle here off the top of the chassis and sort of dusted it with some heat resistant flat black paint and then some clear lacquer, so that it won't rust anymore and it won't smell terrible when it gets warm, and it looks a lot better. Now it's time to fit in the tubes and plug in the speaker and see if we can get any sound out of it. Alright, we've got the amp plugged into the current limiter. The electrodynamic speaker is plugged into the circuit. All nice cleaned up tubes and clean tube sockets. Let's turn it on and see what we hear. Looks like the tubes are lighting up. Uh-oh. Sounds like a 60 cycle hum. So apparently AC is getting right to one of the tube grids, it sounds like. So let's flip it over, test the tubes to make sure we don't have a short of some sort in the tubes, because let's face it, they're old. If they pass muster, then we're going to have to start looking here in the circuit. I think I may have found the source of the 60 cycle hum. There is a piece of resistor wire of around 250 ohms between the 6.3 volt AC heater and the cathode of the output tube. Okay, I'm a little stunned by that, but I've removed it and I have a feeling that's going to cut down on the hum. We'll see. I've also had to replace all sorts of resistors that are way out of spec on this, and hopefully the next time we try it we'll have a better result than we did before. Here we see Casey in her favorite position other than eating, and that is sleeping on her psychedelic pillow. What do you have to say to the folks at home, Casey? You gonna say hello? No, guess not. Well, let's start off with the basics. Look, the grounding on this to the chassis can't be good. Look at all the grunge down here in the mess. So I removed the transformer nut and I'm going to scrape a clear area here where there's good metal-to-metal contact. Then I'm going to reroute the green chassis ground down under the nut so that we get good solid grounding for our filter caps and our center taps. Okay, I've cleaned away all the wax and paint and other grunge here so that the bare chassis is exposed. I've rubbed the underside of the grounding lug with coarse sandpaper. I'm going to use a fresh nut and lock washer. Then I'll resolder the wires and also bring in the chassis grounding wire over here and add it to this grounding lug. Alright, I've removed the two center taps from that ground lug. Let's try to identify what they're the center taps to. Okay, I've connected to this one, and then up here is one end of the high voltage winding, and you see that we have 153.1 ohms. So this right here, the yellow wire, is the center tap for the two red high voltage wires, which means that the remaining green grounded wire must be the center tap for the 6.3 volt filament circuit. So I've come down here to one of the two wires from the 6.3 volt filament circuit. I've connected an ohmmeter lead there and to the center tap. Now we would expect some sort of measurable resistance in between the center tap and one of the output lugs, but there isn't any, which tells me then that the center tap, I notice that the wire appears to be broken right here, but may be internally disconnected, or for some reason this 6.3 volt center tap is not functional. And we can see here that that circuit should have a center tap according to the schematic that is grounded. So this may be our problem, although I'm never optimistic with an easy solution. Okay, I'm going to check back in here to see if the wire is broken, see if I can find some fresh wire past the break, and double check. But if not, I guess we'll have to use a virtual center tap for a filament circuit. Okay, this orphan center tap that doesn't seem to relate to any of the other wires in the power transformer, I'm going to leave disconnected, and I have created over here two 100 ohm resistors to ground in the filament circuit, which will work as a virtual center tap and balance the voltage between both wires in that parallel circuit. Well, we have the amp plugged in and turned on. However, there's still some hum, although it's just a fraction of the loudness that it was before. It does not respond to the volume control, so apparently we still have a grounding issue, or perhaps in one of these tubes there is AC getting either to the grid or to the cathode. Okay, so we've got some more checking to do. Got a little microphonic action on the 6C5. Okay, so let's continue our work. Now let's take a look at the input circuit of this amp, which I think you're going to agree is very unusual. Input jack number 1 is labeled guitar here. Now we come in through a 500K grid stopper, okay, directly to the grid of the 6C8. Now there's no volume control, nothing, okay, it's wide open. And our impedance to ground is a 250K resistor. Okay, so this one's wide open with an extremely high grid stopper value. Now let's look at input number 2. Okay, I can't read what it's labeled as, but we come in here to the volume control, so far so good, but then straight into the grid of the second triode of the 6C8. There is no grid stopper, there is no impedance to ground. Okay, so it's like we go from one extreme to the other, and to be honest with you, I just don't think this is an acceptable arrangement. Let's rewire this in a more traditional fashion, say with a different input impedance for number 1 and number 2, but with grid stoppers, and have them both go through the volume control. Okay, and let's see how that affects the hum and the sound of the amp. Here's my drawing of the input circuit as it is now wired. Both of the input jacks, 1 and 2, are self-grounding. They both have 1 million ohms to ground impedance. Input number 1 has a 470K grid stopper going to the grid cap of the 6C8 tube. Okay, now the input number 2 has a 100K grid stopper, and it goes into the other grid, which is pin 5 of the 6C8. In case you're wondering about these high grid stopper values, recall that the owner of the amp is a harmonica player, and he specifically requested that these values be kept quite high to cut down on the chances of acoustic feedback. So I have complied with his wishes, and we'll see how this affects the tone and volume of the amplifier. Now, instead of the volume only being applied to input number 2 and number 1 being WFO, in both cases now I've taken the output through the 0.047 microfarad coupling cap and run it through the volume control and the wiper going on to the 6C5 grid. This way I have two independent inputs, but both of them are controlled by the volume control. And here is the actual wiring with the 470K grid stopper going through the center wire here to that grid cap, and the 1 meg to ground for ground reference. On the second input, you can see down here that we have the 100K grid stopper, and it has a 1 million ohm impedance to ground resistor. Coming from the two combined plates to the 0.047 microfarad cap that you see down on the bottom there, the coupling cap, we're going to come around here to the top lug of the volume control, and then the wiper is going to come over here to the grid of the 6C5 tube. Now let's see if this works better. Okay, keep your fingers crossed. Everything's plugged in and ready to go. I'll turn it on. Turn it up to about 1/3 volume. Tubes are lighting up. And the amp is on, but it is absolutely dead quiet. How about that? Now let's see if it's amplifying. I will crank this up a little. And now just to pile on to the misery, before I can test the newly wired input circuit, it turns out the volume control has failed. I have my ohm meter leads on the two outside lugs. We know that that should read 500K resistance, which is the resistance of the pot. Instead, there is no continuity in the volume control pot, so it's going to have to be replaced. Well, this is definitely one of those jobs you dread, because you have to unsolder about 8 or 10 wires and then get it out. I've cleaned it, all of the terminals, removed all the little stubs. The solder, I polished them up with the wire brush. Now let's open up this potentiometer and see what the heck has gone wrong. The devil himself must have designed this jewel, because besides the 4 large tabs that you have to straighten out, there's 4 small ones. Why? God only knows. Anyway, let's see what's going on inside this thing. Well, I have sprayed it with cleaner. I have scrubbed it with a real soft toothbrush. I've blown it out with compressed air, and no matter what I do, there is no continuity from one end to the other of the pot. So I'm going to have to go dig through the old parts bin and see if I can find a replacement. Well, it appears that I do have an audio taper 500K alpha pot, and I have the little piggyback on-off switch, which I'll have to remove this back cover and install it. Okay, so let me do that. Now we have an on-off switch with a properly functioning 500K audio taper potentiometer. Let's install it and rewire it. Okay, here's the new volume control and on-off switch installed. There were only 8 wires that had to be reconnected, so I got off easy. So let's flip this over and see if it worked. Okay, let's flip on the power switch. Turn the volume up to about, what would that be, about 2 out of 10. There is a very faint power hum that is, I think, perfectly normal for this amp. I'm not getting any microphonics out of the tube. Now let's see if it's amplifying. Oh yeah, perfect. Of course, we'll have to test it with a guitar and all, but it does seem to be amplifying. Let me change from input number 1 to input number 2, which should be higher gain. Okay, then we'll see how that works. Okay, turn the volume back up. It is louder. Definitely higher gain. Okay, I think we've got it pretty well under control. I think next it needs to have a guitar hooked up and strum a few chords through it. Thought it might be a good idea to check the plate voltage while we're at it, and it looks like it's around 256, and let's check the plate current. So I've measured the DC resistance across the primary winding of the output transformer. It's 415 ohms. And now we'll watch the voltage drop across that resistance to calculate the plate current. It looks like the voltage drop is around 13.2 volts. Okay, I'll write that down and calculate. And here are the results. 256 plate volts, and plate current 31.8 milliamps. Plate dissipation about 8.14 watts. Now bear in mind, this isn't a 6V6, okay? This is an oddball tube. It's a 6N6. And I looked in the tube section here of my tube manual, and the 6N6 was already obsolete back in the 50s. So it's relegated here to the condensed tube data section, and there is no plate dissipation value for it. So let's just keep our fingers crossed. That seems conservative for an output tube. Okay, and plate current seems about right for 6V6 type of tube, so let's just live with it. Well, time for a little house cleaning here on the cabinet, and I know purists will be outraged that I removed that coagulated pile of rat feces from the corner, but I just couldn't resist. I put a little lemon oil here on the speaker grill. I haven't heard back from the owner about whether or not he wants that grill cloth replaced, so we're waiting on that. And I have the speaker out, and the cone is in fairly good shape. You can see where it's had some repairs. What I'm going to do now is coat the perimeter with 2 light coats of contact cement, which will sort of rubberize it and rejuvenate it. It seems relatively stiff, and I'm not sure if we got a little voice coil rub or not. There may be. If so, it's slight. So let me do some detail work here on the speaker, blow out the dust, and then maybe we can put all this back together before we do our audio testing. Well, I patched a few more of the little cracks in the perimeter of the speaker cone, and then coated it with a thin coat of contact cement to soak in and rubberize and rejuvenate the suspension. It feels pretty good. It's pretty solid, and hopefully this will work for the customer for a long period of time. If not, he can always send the speaker back to me and I can recone it. Alright, I got the speaker installed back in the cabinet, and the chassis, I've just slid it in. I don't have the floor plate in, and I have not put in the screws to hold the chassis in. This is just a test to see if it sounds okay, and if it does, then I'll go ahead and finish the installation of the chassis. But I just wanted you to see how nice it looks in here, all cleaned up. Let me turn it around so we can see the... I did some minor repairs on the handle just to strengthen it. Put in the old grill cloth. I couldn't find an exact replacement, so I thought, well, you know, that's just part of it being old. But got the fretwork back in place, and now let's just play a couple quick tunes through this, use the camera microphone and see what we think, and then we'll move into a full audio test. hope you all were as impressed with that demo as I was. I'll tell you, this may be one of the better sounding small amps I've ever heard. A great volume, excellent bass, good clarity. It seems to have it all. So it's time to button it all up now, put it all back together, and let's get out the SM57 and do some audio demos the right way. Well, I guess that about does it for this video on the small but mighty 1939 K Model 859 amplifier. I hope you enjoyed it and that you'll stay tuned for future videos. I wanted to thank all of our Patreon patrons and PayPal contributors for their generosity in keeping us on the air and advertising free. Should you wish to join them, I will put links in the video description to assist you to do so. The second feature will be a video I made during a recent trip to Nashville, Tennessee to visit my daughter. We went to Carter Vintage Guitars, which is a very famous guitar and amplifier store there in Nashville, and tried to record a lot of interesting things that I think you'll get a kick out of. So please stay tuned and take this trip with us. We'd be glad to have you come along. Meanwhile, thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon. Yep, surveying all the goodies here. Carter Vintage Guitars. Wouldn't you like to have all this in your back room and not have the police searching for you for burglary? Look at this. And always good advice. Do not sit or climb on amps. I tell Jack and Ollie that all the time. What do we have here? Barbalux reverb. Pretty sweet. There you go, for the budding steel guitar player. I just want to run down a line here that will make your hair stand on end. Talk about some tweed amps. And check out the twin and the white leatherette. And they're priced accordingly, but gorgeous. Here's a stack of beauties. The Bassman, Showman, Bantam bass amp, which I'm not really familiar with. Gibson Falcon. Bunch of guitar cases. Here we go, stashed over in the corner. Obviously Valco amp with that refrigerator handle. It's a Gretsch and it's a big beauty. And another Gretsch behind it. Look at the Epiphone. Those control panels don't tend to hold up real well, and that one is perfect. Gorgeous. Magnetone with that kind of plastic case. Bandmaster, Showman, Supersonic, another Supersonic, Super Reverb, and Concert. Gorgeous. Just stacked up like cordwood. How about a Gibson Leon Rhodes prototype? Look at this thing. Look at the inlay and all. Gorgeous. And only a paltry 12.5. Old Leone, only like the best. Nice, huh? Kind of unusual, a mini humbucker in the bridge position and a regular humbucker in the neck position. I don't think I've ever seen that before. How about Steve Earle's old Truss Art guitar? I bet it could tell you some stories. 3 P90s. Those of you who watched some of my videos from several months ago remember the Twin 12 Silvertone. I think it was, what, a 1474? Look at the Supra. What a dandy, huh? And this is the kind of stuff I like. Musical notes on the drill clock. You can't go wrong. This is a sweetheart right here. And look at this one next to it. This was National. Premier, I've had one of these. And a Dr. Z. And like I said, Leon Rhodes did not mess around with his guitars. Here's I guess a tribute model, my Epiphone. Now check this out. 40 grand. Whew. Just touching it cost me 10 bucks. And for the collector who thinks he has everything, how about a high-powered 1958 Fender Twin? It's been recovered, new handle, yours for a paltry sum of $18,500. Gorgeous. Oh, beautiful amp with a control panel. And the quality of customer music is a little better than you're going to hear at the Guitar Center. Look at these. Of course, these are reissues, the D'Angelico, they're recently done. Beautiful. Gorgeous. Oh. 54 Gibson Super 400C. Good God, Jimmy Adkins. I take it. Wow, Jimmy was easy on it. Look at that. Sweet. I'm surreptitiously recording this background music. This is a man just effortlessly playing as well as you've ever heard in your life. Incredible. I'm not hearing smoke on the water. Mandolin headquarters. God, these guys are good. Incredible. Some display mandolins. And one being beautifully played. acoustic heaven. I know nothing about banjos, but the Sullivan banjo certainly is a fancy basket. Only 10 big ones. And then down here, a Vinton Simplex Paragon. It doesn't look old. It looks like a boutique amp of some sort. Never seen anything like that before. Here's a nice 55 Telecaster. It looks all original and heavily played. Beautiful. For a paltry $27.5. There's a Fender Strat. Look at this, bunch of replaced parts, body, neck, next up, 30 G's. Ooh, sweet. We're getting ready to go eat barbecue. That you can outside, you can smell it. It's wonderful. My mouth's watering. Thought I'd take one last pass down the fresh line of amps here. Twin reverb. Guess we've seen a couple of those recently. Pro reverb. Okay. Vibrolux reverb. Nice little Princeton, clean as can be. Blackface. It's a 66. Little Champ, 950, blackface. And a, looks like a, no, 65, Vibro Champ, 750. Seems reasonable. So it's farewell for now to Carter vintage guitars. And we're going to go eat.